Hey, great to have you here. So back today with another horror review video, and today we're going to be covering 2013's Evil Dead. So I know people have probably varying backgrounds on the Evil Dead franchise, with the first couple with Ash Williams and then Army of Darkness with Ash as well, and then some time between those and this 2013 version. Then we also had Evil Dead Rise recently a couple years ago, so there's quite a bit of expansion across the franchise, but overall I feel like it's a relatively strong franchise and wanted to cover the 2013 Evil Dead in today's video. So not waste any more time, let's just jump right in here. So I'm gonna list some pros and cons and kind of go through the plot of the story. So you kick off with a girl who is being held captive and her father is in front of her and she ultimately is pleading for her life, not really sure what's going on. And then suddenly she does a little bit of a turn and turns pure evil. And it's kind of awesome to see that snap change that she makes when she's just pleading for her life, and then her father's like, no, I have to do this, I have to take you out. And as soon as she realizes she's not getting out, she just switches and goes pure evil mode, and he winds up lighting her on fire and shooting her in the head. And we kind of fast forward in time to the current plot of the story from there. So really strong opening with that girl as far as that really innocent look, and then just making that 180 to being totally and completely evil from there. And as I said, I'm going to list some pros and cons and just kind of go through the story and then give my overall summary at the end. So as far as the plot here, we have a girl who has been dealing with drug abuse and so forth, and her reason for being here, so it's a group of friends taking her to somewhat detox at this cabin. Her family owns this cabin, her and her brother are there, and it seems like she's had a bit of a rough relationship with him where he wasn't fully present in their lives growing up, and especially with her mother's passing, her brother wasn't there for it, and she was having to take a lot of the burden on herself. So there's a little bit of conflict between the family and friends, but they're here nonetheless. The friend group seems to really know Mia, the main character, who's going through this detox, and they also know her brother, whose name is David, and they seem to have some baggage as well, where the friend Eric, I think is his name, Eric and David have a relationship where it feels like Eric feels a little bit similar to Mia, that it seems like David hasn't always been around, and when things get tough, he may bail at times. So there's a bit of a conflict among the group, but they ultimately agree, hey, we need to bring Mia out here to this cabin and allow her to be away from drugs and really just recover her life as a whole. So they do a little bit of backstory there with them all meeting, and then she dumps the drugs out into a well, and then advances the story a little bit. She's struggling with being away from the drugs. It sounded like she had previously tried this and it didn't go well. So I really like the backstory as far as why they're here and why they're reluctant to leave. A lot of times when things go bad in horror movies, it feels like you should clearly leave, and they had a good reason here. If she was acting erratic like she does, they may think it's, oh, because she's away from the drugs, she's just fiending for any substances at that point, and she's both A, doing something crazy to hopefully get drugs again, and then two, just being away from them and having kind of panic attack vibes is expected when you're somewhat detoxing from that experience, depending on the person, obviously. But so I think the plot makes sense as far as why they're there, why they're not going to leave despite her acting strange, and what they think may be going on with her ultimately. She winds up running away because she's freaked out by the area, and it's like raining heavily. She crashes the car and runs off, gets grabbed by this woman in the forest. I believe it's the woman from the beginning that we saw, and you see the like black goo come out of the girl's mouth, and she like goes into the other girl. So Mia is now infected with this condition. So the friends come and gather her, and they see her kind of just against a tree stump, bring her back home, and from there, you see her just start to kind of lose it. She starts to see that girl again. She is in the shower, and her skin's like peeling off because she's just sitting like scalding water ultimately. I do want to say, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. This all really starts by the cabin. In the basement of the cabin, or the underneath, there's a lot of old stuff there, and they wind up finding the book. I believe it's the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon for Evil Dead as a whole. And you have them take a look at it. As far as giving a con, I will say Eric as a character, it feels like you needed some jumping off point for the plot. He felt like a very dumb character at the beginning, in that he opens the book and sees all these things saying like, don't read it, don't do anything, don't speak the words. And he does some shadings to see what the words say in another language and ultimately reads them out loud. I don't know why you would do that. Like, if he's just curious, he may look at it and then at the very most, he would think it in his head and read it. When he's sitting there by himself, I don't get the point of him reading out loud unless he's trying to cause problems or obviously for plot development. So I will say, if I'm giving any critiques, this is one that originally came to mind, and it felt like, I don't know why he chose to really go into it. If he didn't believe it, it feels like it's phony, so why waste your time? And if you believe it, you probably wouldn't touch it. So that was a little strange having him make that choice, but he wants to redeem himself. Mia, who's gone through this experience, and then you see her puke on Olivia. They wind up putting Mia down in the basement where they saw the book and closing it down there. Then you have Olivia go to get the drugs to like try to tranquilize her, essentially, to try to prevent her from being erratic like she's being. And when Olivia goes to do so, she starts to do a little turn in the bathroom, and Eric, the friend, winds up going to check on her to see what's going on. And you have a really great scene here where you have Eric see her in the shower in the bathroom, and she's like carving her mouth and her face with this piece of glass, which is a very grotesque scene, but I think it's really well done, and it just shows the just craziness that this ultimately has come over this woman. And you realize there's no reasoning with this situation at all. He kind of falls down, hits himself, and then he tries to crawl towards the door. Door closes. You have her get up. She stabs him in the chest. Eric gets thrown through the ringer in this movie. It's kind of awesome how much he endures and just keeps going, but he gets stabbed in the chest, and then she grabs the needle and just stabs him in the face over and over again with it. And he winds up knocking her off and ultimately whacking her. I think it's with like the toilet, something like that, but knocks her out and kills her. Friends come in. He pulls out like the needle from his face. He explains, she attacked me. And you have the group kind of split off a little bit, and that's a little bit of a strange choice they make. But I will say too, previously I mentioned that Mia tries to run away and gets in a car accident. They also try to leave at another point where David takes Mia and tries to leave, and they're flooded in. So the roads are blocked. They can't leave. So that's part of why they stay as well. But after the interaction between Olivia and Eric, you have David kind of taking care of Eric and stitching him up and trying to treat his wounds ultimately. And you have Natalie, who's in the house by herself. She's going to get some more things to help. And she hears the noise from Mia in the basement. And that's kind of a mistake I feel like it's made as far as another character choice. So some questionable choices by some of these characters. Some are believable, but I understand if you're a bit shocked that this thing has possessed her. You're not really in that world where you believe that's a reality. So I can get maybe that. She goes down, which I think is probably dumb. The door like closes, and I don't know why. If I was her, I would like break a window or open a window to try to get out of the house and go back to the other two guys. But she chooses to go down in the basement and talk to Mia, and Mia winds up attacking her. She gets up and I think breaks one of the stairs and ultimately gets out of the basement, but then she gets dragged back in. And you have Mia just do a bunch of gross stuff. Like, I think she winds up biting her hand, which winds up infecting her. And then you have Natalie go upstairs and she's like freaked out and closes it. She grabs the electric cutter, like to carve like turkeys and stuff like that, and she holds it up to her arm because her arm is starting to change form. It's like becoming all black and so forth. And she realizes she's getting infected. And with any of these type of things, you kind of expect, oh, maybe if I cut it off, it'll, I'll be better. It won't have got to the rest of my body. So there's kind of a cool scene where she's like debating doing that. And you see Mia, who's peeking through the opening of the basement, and she's trying to talk to Natalie, and she's like saying over and over again, she's like, don't do it. And she has that really creepy exorcist voice. So really well done acting there. And just, it's that mix of like very scary, but kind of funny, where she's like, has this really deep voice and just yelling her like, don't cut it off. She's like saying, don't do it type of thing. And she winds up doing it. And we're left wondering, is it taking care of her, is it not? And then the guys come in and they see that what happened. And then they start trying to figure out what to do with Mia. And then you have them debating back and forth as far as what they're going to do. And here's where they kind of change a little bit. I feel like Eric redeems himself and says, hey, I read from this book. This bad stuff's happening. We need to address it. We need to kill Mia probably. And we need to have a plan to go forward with. And David is very non-committal. I get it, it's his sister, but he's seen some crazy stuff that he knows this isn't normal. So I'm a little surprised he's still hesitant, but he's definitely like, I don't know, maybe she's infected with some disease and stuff like that. It's like, Eric said something like, I don't know of a disease that's going to make somebody stab themselves in the face with glass. And so I feel like they kind of take altering paths where David's up here as far as how he starts, as far as his logical choices. Eric's kind of down here when he opens the book. And throughout the movie, they kind of cross where Eric becomes a lot smarter. David, he feels like he makes a lot of mistakes and just is super naive a little bit. So that's a bit of an interesting transition from both characters. Just when things go wrong, I feel like Eric rises to the occasion, whereas David, he drops a little bit. He winds up redeeming himself maybe at the end, if you want to say. But you have Natalie ultimately come out, and we find out, no, she's infected. She still has this going on, and she's being controlled by Mia. She grabs his nail gun, starts shooting it at them. I don't know, once again, Eric gets blasted with nails, and he's just like still fighting. David gets hit with like 3 of them in his leg, and he just drops to the floor, and he's not able to even like remotely get up and go get the gun. So he becomes kind of worthless, whereas Eric, I feel like, is fighting off a little bit better. He's going for the gun, and then you have Natalie grab this like crowbar, and she swings it at David a little bit. Then you have Eric grab the nail gun. He starts shooting at her. She turns and goes for him, and then she starts whacking him with the crowbar really like effectively. And you wind up ultimately having David redeem himself. He grabs the gun finally and shoots her arm, so she's got no arms at this point, and she's kind of just lost goods at this point. Then you have Eric and David reconvene, and David finally gets a bit on board with the plan, but Eric has pretty much, he's just barely even functioning at this point. He's been stabbed by so many things and beaten down, and he's like, dude, we need to do this. He tells them about, we need to burn Mia, we need to either delimb Mia, or we need to bury her. And they're torn on what to do, and you have David finally reconcile with the situation and says, all right, I'm going to do it. He goes in the house, puts gasoline everywhere, lights his lighter, and then he starts hearing her sing, and once again, he falls for it. And maybe you could say he just thinks there's another way at this point, but he gets a little lured in by the fact that it is his sister, and he doesn't want to do this to her. He walks away. He's like, I'm going to have this plan instead, where I'm going to bury her and kill her, and then bring her back to life by electrocuting her with these things I found in the shed. So I don't know how he would have found all that stuff, but we'll just believe it was there and it was functional. But he goes back to the house, and here's another part where it's like, yeah, character, you made kind of a ridiculous choice. He goes down in the basement by himself, just kind of aimlessly walking around. I don't know what his plan was. I think he has a shovel at one point, but he goes down there and just gets blindsided by Mia and gets knocked away, and he's like getting drowned by her. And sure enough, Eric comes in to help, and he whacks Mia in the head and knocks her out. Then you have David with him, and Eric is pretty much like done at this point. And I guess he kind of dies there, but David just kind of sets him off. You want to say he's trying to be like nice, but he just puts him in the water. He like drowns him almost. And I know Eric mentioned a few times throughout the movie that he doesn't want to turn into the devil's servant or work for the devil. He wants to just die. And so I don't know if David was trying to do something with that, but he just puts his head in the water. And even if Eric had a chance of not being dead, he's clearly drowning now at this point. So you have David take Mia out. He is burying her. She's doing this, like trying to talk through the mask and doing kind of the back and forth once again with being Mia and being the demon. And they do this quite a few times throughout the movie. I liked it a few times, but I think the last time it got a little bit stale. And I'll talk a little bit about it, but they do this thing in the movie where they cut from seeing a background of something, they'll go away, and then they'll come back to where they were in the first time. And they'll have different things pop up. So the beginning of the movie I mentioned with the intro, you have the girl who's begging for her life. And then they cut to her, and she's suddenly demonic and is screaming and is very evil looking. You have a scene where you see a box cutter or a blade on the base, in the basement. We cut away, we cut back to it, the blade is gone. So they do this a few times, and they do it once again here where they see her in the grave, we cut away, we come back, and now her eyes are open and she's talking. I thought it was a cool mechanic to use. They just did it a few too many times. Like, I think they had it 4 or so times in this movie where they have that same mechanic, and it works, but you don't want to overdo it, I would say. She gets buried, and he digs her up, tries to do the electrocution, and nothing happens. He starts to walk away and like covers her head. She gets up, and she's back to life. She's normal again, as far as we can tell. He embraces her, which is surprising because I feel like I'd be a little bit timid. I'd be like, "Are you sure? Are you messing with me again?" But they embrace. It appears to be her. They go to get the keys in the house, or he goes in, and he runs into Eric, who has now come back as another demon as well. Stabs David in the neck. I think it was with like pliers. And then you see David kind of scurry away, and he sees Mia. Mia runs in to try to help him. He does the hero thing, which we see in a lot of movies and shows, where he's like, "You go out of the house. I'm going to close the door. I'm going to take care of this." I don't know if maybe the stab wound he had was too fatal that he wouldn't have survived ultimately. I don't know, but either way, he chooses I'm going to sacrifice myself and die to protect you and defeat this demon Eric now. So he closes the door, grabs the shotgun, he's pointing at Eric, and then he turns it and shoots the gas can there, and the house catches on fire, and they presumably are both dead now. Mia's outside, she's freaking out. She sees like a necklace on the ground, and then we have something coming out of the ground, and I think it's the girl from the beginning again, and she's like crawling after her. They do a little bit of a chase scene where they go away, and she winds up into the tool shed again. A little bit silly here, but I get the point of the appealing to fans. She sees a machete there, which is a clearly accessible weapon to use to defend herself at this point in time. And she says, "No, I'm going to pass on that. I'm going to grab the chainsaw." So she grabs the chainsaw, the loud chainsaw, and she sees that there's no fuel in it. And she's like, "All right, well, let me see. Is there fuel in here?" And then she sees it, she knocks a shelf, and fuel comes down. She pours it in. She's trying to rev this thing up, and then the demon comes after her. She's like running through this little corridor. And of course, the demon grabs the machete, of all people, and tries stabbing it. It's your typical scene where you're going through a narrow hallway and somebody's stabbing through the wall. So that happens with the machete. One's a pretty gross one where she gets her on the kneecap and like pulls it back. So you have Mia, who's been stabbed a few times at this point. She's trying to escape. She gets out of the little compartment there. She goes over near the car, and she goes under the car with the chainsaw. This part was kind of strange too. She's like revving the chainsaw underneath the car. We got the impression she's under the car to hide. Like she's trying to be stealthy, like she can't be seen under there by the demon. And she's like revving the chainsaw, so you can clearly hear that thing. I don't know how the demon got caught off guard, but you have it happen. She starts the chainsaw finally when the demon's right there by the car and catches her in the legs with it. So demon is now down, and we have the scene where the car from there, the demon pulls it over and it falls on top of Mia. So we have our classic, we have our arm is caught underneath the car and the chainsaw is just out of reach. And we have the demon crawling around the car, approaching Mia, and she's freaking out. And it's all like, I forgot to mention this, but it's like raining blood at this point. So very cinematic. And of course, her arm's under the car. This scene I'm a little bit mixed on. I feel like the practical effects were really cool, but it didn't really look realistic in my opinion because you have her arm stuck under the car. And I haven't had this happen, obviously, so I can't say if this is like how it would look. But it felt like when she was pulling her arm away, it almost looked like it almost kind of had like that putty look where it was like stretching the skin out. It didn't look like human skin at that point. It looked like maybe demonic skin where it was like that cryptic looking like, I don't know. It just didn't look like a real arm being torn off. But either way, it was a cool look to the movie there. She rips her arm off and grabs the chainsaw. Only thing we needed to do more of a nod to Ash Williams was to have her put that chainsaw on her now torn off hand and just use that as a weapon. But we didn't get that far, but we did have her hand get cut off and her have a chainsaw. So felt like a very big homage to Ash Williams. And she grabs the chainsaw, stabs the demon right in the face, and does a really pretty good one-liner, I would say, saying like, "Go back to hell." And the demon's like head gets split in two, and she goes back to the ground. And we have Mia go back and get her stuff, and it kind of fades away, but we assume she gets in the car and leaves, and ultimately is the sole survivor of the movie. So that's a summation of the movie. I know I rambled on a little bit with that, but there's parts throughout that I liked, I disliked. I covered most of them throughout. One part that was kind of weird I noticed, and maybe you want to say this as part of the demonic spell, but she had a scene where she had a when she was under possession, she had a blade and she like licked it. And I feel like that would have split her tongue in two. But then when she comes back to life, her tongue is fine. So we'll just assume that that is part of the reality of the situation. But that's kind of the path from start to finish for the movie. As far as some of the pros, I mentioned a lot of these. The beginning I really liked. The reason for not leaving and being under detox made sense. You have the trapped from the flooding situation, so once again, it makes sense that you're still stuck there. You have the scene with Olivia with the glass, which I think was probably the coolest gnarly scene where she's cutting her face with the glass. You have the great Exorcist-like scene with Mia talking to Natalie, where she's telling her not to cut her arm off. Really like that. And really great acting overall by most of the actors, I would say, in this movie. Eric specifically, I feel like did really well because he was traumatized throughout, so he really expressed that. I don't know, he had the most emotion on his face because his scenes probably had the most numerous of those scenes. Most of the other characters had kind of one big scene where they died. Eric kind of traveled throughout the entire movie, so he really shined, I would say. The scene setup, as I mentioned, with the back and forth with things like the box cutter in the beginning, and they did it a little bit, maybe too much, but it was just enough that it wasn't too bothersome. You have Eric really be the savior of the movie. He obviously dies, but he saves David a bunch, which ultimately saves me and so forth. So Eric started the whole thing, but without Eric, we wouldn't have had any survivors also. So take that what you will. He was both the cause and the resolution for the movie. It was interesting having the choice of doing the burying instead of like the burning or delimbing. That was kind of a cool concept of having multiple ways to approach this. We have the revival with the electricity. The homage to Ash with the chainsaw was awesome. It was over the top. As I said, she should have grabbed the machete, but for the sake of this being a movie, I did think it was cool. And then satisfying final kill with the go back to hell line and her living. That's something I would say too. If you're watching the movie and you see her as the demon at the beginning, her being the sole survivor is not what you expected. At least I did not. So cool having that come full circle with her being the one that lives and everyone else ultimately dies. As far as cons, I'll cover a few. I may have mentioned these already, but the friend, it's unrealistic. Eric, what he does at the beginning, reading the book out loud by himself. I don't buy that somebody would have done that, although he does become the smart one later on. You have Natalie go downstairs where Mia has already had her reign of terror unleashed, and she goes down there by herself after all that chaos instead of leaving out a window or whatever she wants to do. You have the brother believe Mia, and I get the whole sister thing, and he's a little timid. So it's believable in some sense, but you have him not believing Mia's crazy or possessed after seeing her look psycho so many times. Took him a little bit longer than maybe I would have expected to realize this is not a salvageable situation. We need to cut bait at this point. I get he doesn't want to kill his sister, but either way. Then you have David on the ground, as I mentioned, when Eric's fighting Natalie after being shot with the nail gun. He's doing most of the combat despite being the most injured one. Obviously, David gets the final shot with the shotgun, so he redeems himself, but that's, I feel like he was carrying the whole team, Eric was, I would say. Then once again, you have David go down the basement by himself, so another character going down there without a foolproof plan who just gets bombarded by Mia there, and thankfully Eric comes and saves the day, but another blunder by somebody trying to just, let's go down there by ourselves, it'll be fine. And I will say, the chainsaw thing, while it was a fan service thing, it's not necessarily a realistic thing with the machete. You're going to grab the machete probably 10 times out of 10, but it was fun to do that. They like to do that whole homage thing, so I can appreciate that. Then, as I said, you have her hiding under the car, revving the chainsaw, so didn't totally buy that. Obviously, she's there at that point. The practical effects I did really appreciate. It didn't feel like they relied on a bunch of CGI or stuff like that, like some modern movies may do. Even if the arm looked a little goofy when she ultimately had that final act where she pulls her arm from the car. I thought this was a really strong movie. The plot made sense. You had a character needing to be detoxed from this drug abuse that she's been living. You have these conflicted characters who are all coming together. So a bit of their prior relationships impacting the plot here. You have them reasonably try to leave a few times and not effectively work. So the only thing that really got me is, once again, Eric opening the book. I feel like most of the other things I can say, okay, you made a bad choice, things happen. That one, which the whole plot gets set off of, I feel like, I'm not sure that made sense. But either way, really love the movie, really love the surprise of Mia being the one that survives at the end. Really like the development throughout the cabin and just the carnage that ensues in that small, confined space. And all of the violence, I think, was really well done. The scene with Olivia is probably my favorite, as I said, with the bathroom scene where she's got the glass. But just a really great movie. And I know this is a movie that I feel like was a little strange. I think when this first came out, I didn't watch it back when it first released, but when this first came out, I heard people didn't like it a whole lot. And maybe that's why it took a while to get Evil Dead Rise, I'm not sure. But I think as time has gone on, or after the movie has been out for a while, people have grown more fond of it over time. So it's weird. Sometimes that happens with movies where looking back, suddenly you rewatch something, you're like, wow, I really like that a whole lot more than I did at the time when I first saw it. So it felt like that's happened quite a few people for this movie. So interesting perspective there. But overall, I really enjoy this. I think it's a great horror movie. Definitely recommend this movie for folks. Hopefully you've seen it already, since I did kind of cover the plot at this point in time in the video. But either way, I would encourage you to rewatch it just because I think it's a great film myself. And I really enjoyed rewatching it as well. So this is one I'm going to give a 9 out of 10. I've mentioned this before. I try to cover the full span of 1 through 10. So being a 9 out of 10 is a very high regard, in my opinion, for this movie. It just feels like it hits everything right. The only thing I'm going to take 1 point off for is the whole Eric opening the book and reading it out loud, just because it felt like to get to that part of the plot, we had to make a bit of a jump. But other than that, the movie is fantastic. It hits a lot of the requirements for a movie. It's a great horror movie. It's a great just film overall regardless. So once again, 9 out of 10. Really enjoyed this one. So what did you guys think? Is this an Evil Dead you really liked? What do you think of the franchise as a whole? Where does this one rank amongst the other movies in the franchise? We'd love to see your thoughts down below in the comments, as well as, I guess, the TV show as well. Curious to see if any of you watched that. I have not personally watched it, so we'd love to see some feedback there too. So appreciate you guys so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.